Friends, just last week, you and I, along with Jill Simonello, went through most of the new car introductions at the 2016 Los Angeles International Auto Show. Now, I have since shipped Jill back to Chicago, and it is a long holiday weekend, but before I left the auto show, let's just say I took a souvenir with me. You see, there are only a handful of these 2017 Nissan Sentra NISMO editions here in Los Angeles. All of them, except for one, is still on the LA Auto Show floor. So while we have this special opportunity with the first ever NISMO Sentra to come to our shores, let's do a full first drive review, and today we will do a tech review. So that means we need to start where we always start, the engine. Now, before we dive off too far into the NISMO version of the Sentra, first ever in the US, we need to cover an important point. A number of the greasy bits here are going to be familiar to you, especially if you saw our episode we shot in Georgia with the SR Turbo version of this car. So, with that said, 1.6 liter, 4-cylinder, direct injected gasoline turbocharged engine. 10.5 to 1 compression ratio. Now, how does it all translate into output? Well, it's 188 horsepower, which comes in at a relatively aggressive 5,600 RPM. And then 177 pound-feet of torque. Now that's the important thing for you and I, because that's effectively pulling or pushing power. But where does that come in? Here it comes in at a very low 1,600 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 5,200 RPM, so very usable in terms of what we found over in the SR. Now let's put that aside, and we have two transmissions on offer. Yes, it's a Nissan, so that means there's going to be a CVT. You and I are not going to drive that. This one is the one we are going to drive, which has 3 pedals and 6 forward gears. So let's put all of this aside and let's talk about the bits that affect driving dynamics. Now, as we press on into driving dynamics, we need to unpack this into 2 lists. There's list number 1, which is bits that are shared with the SR Turbo, and then there's list number 2, which is bits that are unique to the NISMO Sentra. Now, we need to step back a little bit, and remember that episode we did with Gary from Nissan's Arizona Test Center? Great guy, longtime friend of the show. He's an incredibly modest guy. In the episode we did with him, he didn't really admit to the fact that he's the one that took a Sentra and 2 Jukes and made a car by himself. Of course, he gave the whole accolades to everybody else but himself, but he's the one that really built this car. Great guy. But what he had to do was take an engine that was heavier and had more power, and really for a car meant for idiots like you and I that are going to take it and go around corners like this really fast. So that means you have to increase the structural rigidity of the car. So what they did was increase the strength of the cowl. They also increased some of the strength, really the lateral strength, of the overall structure of the car. Now let's put that aside because those bits do make it to the Sentra basically intact. Some of the other changes from regular to SR was they added a stabilizer bar front as well as one in the rear. 22 mils here, 24.6 here. Those are exactly the same. Then the brakes, from the standard Sentra, they went up to 11.7 in the front and 11.5 in the rear. Now, just a side note, if one were to spec out a basic SR no turbo, they'd still be 11.5 in the rear. So all of this stays the same. Now let's put that aside. The bits that are unique to this specific car, the NISMO Sentra. Wheels, 18 inches. So these are unique to this car and the biggest on a Sentra. Then the other changes, and this is really the biggest change, the dampers have been completely revamped. They're a different design and the tuning is different, which I have driven the car. You and I will spend more time talking about driving dynamics and overall impressions in our full first drive review, so come back for that. But I will tell you that the changes in the dampers do make a significant difference in the overall driving dynamics of this car. Now, there are other things which I'm sure you can see here, like this spoiler, a rear bumper that's different. Even the front is different. Frankly, yes, it's cooler looking, but does that make a huge difference to you and I? Not really. It's more about what's here and over there. But there is one thing that's not mechanical, maybe cosmetic, that we do need to cover. So riddle me this. What does this car, the 2017 Nissan Sentra NISMO, have in common with one of my most favorite non-Lotus cars, the Volkswagen Golf GTI? Let me give you a couple seconds there. You ready? So if you were to say that they are both sport compacts, close but no cigar. But if you were to say the Verbery seats in the GTI, you would be spot on. Now I know you have all sorts of different terms for those seats, but I love the check pattern in the Volkswagen. Here, it's not so much just the upholstery, it's the seats themselves, and really they're not seats, they're more like Barca loungers. Like, look at the thickness of this seat back here, and that is translated to more bolstering. So there's more bolstering here, there's more bolstering here, and there's much more support here. Now the seats, they're actually pilfered from the Nismo Juke RS. So that means a couple of things. Number one, you get this like red offset stitching here in the seats that's repeated on the shift knob as well as on the steering wheel. And then I'd love to tell you that this faux suede is Alcantara branded faux suede. But I can't honestly say that. So let's just call it faux suede. And that's repeated into the back seat. It's repeated to the steering wheel as well as on the door panel. Now the rest of the interior is box standard Sentra SR Turbo, which is to say a relatively pleasant place to be, with a couple of odd exceptions. Like, for example, faux carbon fiber in a Sentra, I don't quite understand why you're trying to fool anybody there. And then there's the gauge package. There's a slight change in the tachometer. 65% of the tachometer now has a red bezel. Then there is a Nismo logo. And then the push button start makes its way from the SR Turbo, but here it has a satin red finish bezel around the starter button. And that, very nice touch. Then the rest of it is things that we like to see in cars, like regular volume knobs and tuning knobs and fan knobs and buttons for HVAC. But then there are a couple of things that leave me perplexed. Like, for example, if I'm reading all the materials that were given to me correctly, there is no sunroof on offer in the Nismo version of the Sentra. There is in the SR, and I don't quite understand the logic in that, because even if you're going to track this, this is not that kind of a car where it's going to make that big of a difference. And then number two, I don't understand why Nissan has yet to integrate Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And if you think about it, this car is a perfect entree for it, considering the kind of people that would be the target market for this vehicle. So I'd love to know what Nissan is doing there. Other than that, I think we've covered everything on the interior. So in summary, what do we got? Well, this is one of those instances where we have a surprise, but not a surprise you and I were expecting. I know that's kind of an oxymoron when we talk about surprises, because you don't expect surprises. Anyway, this is a surprise where I'm somewhat shocked. In situations like this, I feel full disclosure is required. Now, those of you that know me know that I am a cheapskate, and I am a major Dave Ramsey disciple. So it probably would come as no surprise to you that A, I am not a gambler, B, I have never gambled, and C, I will never gamble. But if I were to be a gambler and I was just in Vegas for SEMA, I would have bet the farm on the fact that this would have had at least 220 horsepower. So I'm sitting here and scratching my head and wondering why Nissan did not bless this with more horsepower over the SR. Now, in fairness to Nissan, you and I will unpack how this all works in the full first drive review, so make sure you come back for that. But I do need to turn this around to you and leave you with a question. It's really renewing the question that I provided you in the SR Turbo episode that we drove in, what was it, Georgia? And the question there was, what would you want this car to be, meaning a Nismo or more power, and how much would you pay? But this is different. All I want to focus on is that engine. I don't want to hear all-wheel drive. I don't want to hear like lowered, any of that kind of stuff. The question is very specific. How much horsepower do you think this should have? And don't come to me with like 350 or 400 horsepower, because you and I both know that Ford has just proven that 350 and 400 horsepower costs $42,000, even if you can get one for $42,000. So what I'm looking for is, how much horsepower do you think this should have? And most importantly, how much are you willing to pay for it? How much horsepower do you think it should have? And how much are you willing to pay for it? Also, let me know what region of the world you hail from, because I want to be able to use this as like market research to the folks at Nissan to translate it into like dollars, euros, or shekels, or whatever it needs to be. So let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Number one, make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you can download for free at Apple iTunes and Google Play. And you know what, as an aside to that, we are live on count 'em, 5 international airlines. And perhaps you should be subscribing to us here so you can see tech reviews and full first try reviews. And number two, I want to leave you with a fun fact, and it's about this very shoot here. Now you think that I was just in that car and I just came out and I'm talking to you now and giving you this whole spiel about how I feel about the horsepower. Well, actually, the bit in the car was yesterday. The minute I stepped out of that car, the sky opened, and I swear that you would have thought a man with a beard in a robe with lots of animals would have basically pulled a very large boat up to this point right here. There was so much rain. So we had to stop shooting, and I'm actually shooting this 24 hours later than when I started. So until I see you for the full first drive review, bis später.